Hi, I'm Andy, this is Evelyn, and we are going to be kicking off our series through Lent called Wholehearted.
We'll be looking at the book 2 Chronicles 14 today.
So, as we kick off the season of Lent, our reading today takes us to the beginning of the reign of King Asa, a leader who stepped into power during a challenging time for the kingdom of Judah. To understand the significance of his leadership, we need to take a quick step back and look at a bigger picture about what was happening in Israel's history. At this point, the once united kingdom of Israel had been divided for several generations. After the reign of Solomon, the nation had split into two, Israel to the north and Judah to the south. The northern kingdom quickly turned away from the worship of God, adopting idolatry and experiencing frequent instability in leadership. Meanwhile, Judah, where Asa would rule, had its own struggles. His grandfather, Rehoboam, had led the nation into spiritual compromise, allowing idolatry to take hold and weakening the kingdom politically. His father, Abijah, had a short and turbulent reign, marked by conflict with the northern kingdom. So when Asa became king, Judah was at a crossroads. The people had drifted away from God, and though they still had temple and traditions of worship, their faith had been mixed with outside influences. The kingdom also faced political uncertainty, surrounded by larger, more powerful nations and vulnerable to attack. Asa inherited a throne with both danger and opportunity. As Asa ascended to the throne, he had a choice. He could follow the patterns of those who'd come before him and led with compromise, doing things that had always been done without causing disruption or controversy. Or he could set a new course, one that sought after God and put the nation back on track spiritually and politically. His reign was an opportunity to bring reform, to re-establish Judah's identity as people devoted to God, and to strengthen the kingdom in the face of external threats. So as we read our passage, we read the chapter for the day, we'll see how his leadership and his faithfulness shaped his rule. But more importantly, we'll consider what we can learn from this period of history. Because the reality is, in moments of challenge, whether for a nation or an individual, and our world feels pretty perilous right now, there are also moments of opportunity. What we choose to do in those moments, how we respond, can make all the difference. One of the first things that Asa did as king was to remove the idols from Judah and call people back to worship of God. He tore down the altars to foreign gods, he broke the sacred pillars, he cut down the Asherah poles that had crept into their culture. The Asherah poles were totems dedicated to a worship of a fertility god. This wasn't just a political move to curry favor, it was a spiritual reset. The people had allowed distractions, compromises, empty rituals to take the place of real devotion to God. And Asa knew that they couldn't move forward as a nation unless those things were stripped away. In many ways, that's exactly what this season of Lent invites us to do. Lent is a time of reflection, a time of letting go of those things that pull our hearts away from God. We often think of this in terms of fasting, giving up chocolate or social media or something else we enjoy. And while those things can be meaningful sacrifices, Asa's example challenges us to go deeper. What are the idols in our own lives? What have we allowed to take up the space in our hearts, leaving less room for God? Maybe it's the obvious distractions, busyness, entertainment, success, comfort. But maybe, just maybe, the thing that we need to strip away isn't worldly at all. Maybe it's the trappings of religion itself, going through the motions, ticking the right boxes, never actually encountering God in a real and transformative way. It's possible to be deeply committed to Christian habits while being far from the heart of Christ. It's possible to read the Bible go to church, say all the right things, and yet still build our faith on routine rather than relationship. Asa didn't just call the people to stop worshipping idols, he called them to seek the Lord. And that's the challenge of Lent. It's not just about removing distractions, it's about redirecting our focus. So as we journey through this season together, let's ask ourselves, what needs to be torn down in our lives so that we can truly seek God? What are we clinging to that might actually be keeping us from a deeper faith? And what are we willing to let go of? Not just for 40 days, but for the sake of something far greater.
After Asa removed the idols and called the people back to God, he did something else that was just as important. He strengthened the nation's defences. He rebuilt and fortified the cities, reinforced the walls and equipped his army, even though at that moment there wasn't a direct threat. There was no war on the horizon, no enemy at the gates. But Asa understood something crucial. You don't wait for the battle to start preparing for it. And the same is true for us spiritually. It's easy to seek God when we're in crisis, when life is hard, when we're struggling, when we feel like we have nowhere else to turn. But what about when things feel steady? What about when we don't feel like we're in a battle? Asa didn't wait for trouble to come before he started strengthening Judah. And we shouldn't wait until we're struggling before we build strong spiritual habits. Nor should going to God become a last resort for us. So, what does that look like for us? It means cultivating a life of prayer before we feel desperate. It means immersing ourselves in Scripture before we feel we're searching for answers. It means being a part of a community before we feel isolated. It means creating rhythms of worship and obedience before we find ourselves tested. Lent is the perfect time to start fortifying our spiritual lives, not just by removing distractions, but by intentionally building habits that will sustain us when difficulties come. The truth is, we don't know what tomorrow holds, but what we do know is who holds tomorrow. There will be struggles, there will be challenges, and there will be moments when we feel under attack. But what we build now, when things feel stable, will determine how we stand when those times come. So the question for us is this: what are we doing right now to strengthen our faith? If everything feels good, are we using this time wisely? Or are we coasting, assuming we'll prepare when we need to? Asa didn't wait for trouble to come knocking. He built the walls, strengthened the gates, and made sure Judah was ready. Are we doing the same in our own lives? And then the battle came. Despite all of Asa's reforms and preparations, Judah still found itself facing an enemy far greater than they could handle. A vast Cushite army marching against them. But Asa didn't panic. He didn't rely on his fortifications alone. Instead, he did what he had been preparing for all along. He depended on God for strength and protection. In 2 Chronicles 14, verse 11, Asa cries out, "Lord, there is no one like you to help the powerless against the mighty. Help us, Lord our God, for we rely on you." And God answered. He gave Judah victory, not because of their walls, not because of their army, but because they had placed their trust in him. This is why we build spiritual habits, why we clear away distractions, why we seek God before the battle ever comes. Because when it does, and it will, we want to be people who don't crumble in fear, but stand firm in their faith. Asa's story reminds us that our strength isn't in the things that we have, but it's in who we trust. So today, the question is simple. When the battle comes, will we be ready? And more importantly, who will we be relying on?